Hello.
Right, at the beginning and the end.
Is that on?
It's now on. See the red light?
Okay.
It's on.
Right.
So you're best to sit around this side and then you can see the red light. You can just look up.
And I'll just press that thing, the red light goes on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought Lily was going to introduce me, but never mind.
I'll introduce you if you want. You don't want that on video anyway.
I'm going to go get a drink of water.
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
You're afraid they're going to be asked the
Would you like me to take
You sit in the front row and you're done. I remember those days.
Had one professor, he threw the
Come on.
Oh, yeah.
You're almost double figures, so that's not bad.
black pony races, and he hit every time.
No heckling, Pat.
Yeah.
No heckling. Yeah, quite. I know about people who sit in the back. It's like people who sit in the back of the class, you know, I always never trust them.
Red light duty. Oh, you're red light on.
Red light
It
duty.
goes off, I've got to press a button. Alarm. Very technical.
Yeah, so we're just waiting for a lady to get a glass of water. So I hope she's not going to throw at me. Right,
Would you like a glass of water?
I've got one.
He's got one there, just in case.
Yeah.
Always have it handy.
Well, it's very good if you'd all come out on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
I hope you're not going to be disappointed.
Have you called Obama about the fiscal cliff, Bill?
No, I'm just going to send him this talk.
Yeah, exactly. That's why he's making a video.
See this Barack and all the problems will be over.
That's okay.
That's quite good, I've got a clock there. What's the clock? Okay? You all right? Fine.
Yes, I'm fine.
Yeah. There you go.
Right, well thank you all for coming today. This is going to be, I've now retitled this talk since the newsletter. I'm now calling it Money Magic, or the magic of money. But it's also about the power of money. We'll try and go through all these various aspects it has. But I want to start off with a story. When I was very small, my Uncle Bob in Scotland gave me a sixpenny piece, worth about a nickel. Uncle Bob was a real staunch Scotsman, and he didn't part from his cash very easily. So this was quite an achievement for him to give me a sixpence. And he wanted to make sure I used it properly. So he took me around to the local candy store. I walked in there and the whole store was just bathed in pink. And it smelt of sugar. It was like being in a sugar sauna. Uncle Bob and I wandered around all the display cabinets, you know, seriously discussing the various possibilities of what I would do with this huge amount of money. And eventually I went up to the counter and solemnly handed over my sixpence. And in return, I was given a bag of the sweetest, stickiest marshmallows you could ever imagine. And for me, at that moment, the magic of money had begun. That magic where you can just take a piece of metal or a piece of paper, a banknote, and turn it into something real, something that you want. And the other week I took my grandkids to Disney. Now, Disney know exactly how much money to charge you to get the maximum for themselves, because they know you're going to want to see your grandkids meeting Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck for the first time. You're going to pay anything. And that's what money can do. But money, I think, is the biggest confidence trick in the world, and one that we all go along with. I mean, look at it. Here is a $20 bill. On the back it says United States of America, in God we trust, and a very handsome picture of the White House. On the business side it says United States of America again, in case you forgot. You've got a picture of Andrew Jackson, and it's signed by Tim Geithner, the US Treasury Secretary, and a lady called Rosie Rios, California girl, who is the Treasurer of the United States. And they say this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, up to $20. And it's designed to instill confidence, to make us all believe in it. But all it is a piece of paper. Now, if I take this piece of paper to a supermarket, I can exchange it, excuse me, I can exchange it for a basket full of groceries, or I can go to a liquor store, hand it over and get a bottle of whiskey that's maybe taken 10 years to produce. Or I can take it to a diner and buy my girlfriend a romantic meal to remember. She'll call me a cheapskate, but it will be a meal to remember. And it's amazing that you can do all these things because we believe in money. And money has this sort of power. And one sign of its power is the number of euphemisms, the number of slang words we have for money. It can be dosh, moolah, lolly, dough, folding stuff, cabbage. Accountants have a whole load of other words like profit, loss, assets, liabilities, reserves, bottom line. And I think the fact that we have all these euphemisms shows how much power money has, because we want to dance around it. We don't actually want to take the risk of putting our hands into the flame. And for a long time, until quite recently, it was thought vulgar to even speak of money. And even today, people don't really like telling you how much they earn. I mean, take me for example. I don't mind telling you how much I'm getting paid for giving this talk. Because it's one big, round, fat zero. But that's okay, you know, that's under no reflection on Pasadena Senior Centre. I offered to do it for nothing. That's okay.
South Pasadena.
South Pasadena, no problem. But supposing I were to tell you that I actually been paid $100. Some of you very kindly might say, not enough. A few people might say, oh, it's about right, and the rest of you might be thinking, huh, why is he getting that much? But then supposing I said to you, I'm getting $1,000. Now most of you might think that's far too much. Maybe one or two might think it's about right, I don't know. But then suppose again, I told you I was getting $100,000. Now in that case, my name wouldn't be Bill Kay, it would be Bill Clinton. That's the sort of money he gets. But you would look at me completely differently. I think a lot of you would be saying, wow, if he's getting that money, he must be absolutely fantastic. So you see what I've done? At each stage, whatever number I've put above my head, you've judged me slightly differently. And it's okay, I'd do the same if I was sitting there with someone else standing here. So that's why we don't like to be judged, and why we're very wary about saying how much we earn. But again, it shows the power of money. And I mean, if you think about it, people kill for money. People commit suicide for it. They get married for money. They get divorced for money. It makes us do all sorts of strange things. And as Liza Minnelli and Joel Grey famously sang, money makes the world go around. Yeah. And the Irish humorist Mike Milligan said, money can't buy you friends, but it does get you a better class of enemy.
Yes.
And this is the sort of thing I want to try and look at. I mean, Susie Orman, the money commentator, she wrote a best-selling book called 9 Steps to Financial Freedom, in which she said about herself, I love money, doesn't everyone? Now, I don't entirely agree with it. I don't think everyone feels quite that way. But then on the next page, she added, most of my clients fear money. Now, it's perfectly logical to fear something you love, but you must admit, it's pretty messed up. So there's all these emotions going around our views of money and what we think about it and how it affects us. And that's what I want to try and look at today. And I'm going to try and give you 3 golden rules for dealing with money, which I think will help you deal with it a lot more easily and make you feel more comfortable about it. Now, who am I? As I said, my name is Bill Kay. I've spent all my life writing about money. For a long time, I was a business and financial journalist, so I've analysed hundreds of companies, and I've interviewed a lot of the people who run those companies and even started them. And more recently, I answer readers' problems, their financial problems. So I'm familiar with money. It's like a language, and I'm fairly fluent in it. I'm fairly comfortable. One thing I will say, I don't have any formal qualifications in money other than a college degree in economics. I'm not a licensed financial planner or wealth manager or broker or anything like that. So you can rest assured I'm not going to try and sell you anything. But if I know so much, why am I standing here and instead of sitting on a beach sipping a pina colada?
Yeah.
Well, matter of fact, I don't particularly like beaches, and I'm not that keen on pina coladas. But I did discover a surprising truth about myself. At least it might surprise you. I realized I don't actually want money that much. Okay, I want enough to be comfortable. I want enough to secure my future, and I think I've about done that. But I realized I didn't want to make the really big money. It's very simple to do that. If you want to make a huge fortune, all you need is to want to enough. The playwright George Bernard Shaw said, to be clever enough to make money, you've got to be stupid enough to want to. And I've met a lot of entrepreneurs, self-made guys. Most of them are high school dropouts. Virtually none of them went to college. They're all driven by personal demons of one sort or another. I mean, maybe they had a brother who went through college and has gone up the corporate ladder, and they want to show their mother and father that they're just as good as he is. Maybe they just couldn't get a job, and so they had to invent a job for themselves. A lot of entrepreneurs have a product or a service that they want to share with people, like Ben and Jerry's ice cream or Apple computers. But most entrepreneurs don't really care how they make the money. They're just knocking on doors, just trying this and trying that, just seeing what works, trying to find that magic breakthrough that'll get them into the big league. Now, the best example I ever came across of someone like that was Richard Branson, who runs Virgin Atlantic and Virgin American Airlines. He came from a wealthy family, and he dropped out of a really top private school in England. He had an idea for a national student magazine, which didn't exist in Britain in those days, and the idea was it would go to all the colleges and it would attract national advertising and so on. And that was okay, and he went on from there into music publishing, where he tried to dodge the tax man, ended up a few months in jail. So he had some adventures in his early life, but then he got into railroads, airlines, financial services, radio, Virgin vodka, Virgin cola, balloon rides. He even had an idea for selling wedding dresses under the name Virgin Brides. Get it? Virgin Brides.
Yeah.
So he would try anything, and he's worth several $1 billion, mainly salted away in offshore tax havens. I've met him a few times. He's a fairly together sort of guy, nothing much phases him, and he seems fairly happy with his life. Most entrepreneurs, though, there's an insecurity about them. They never know if the business is going to go belly up. They feel at any moment they might get rumbled. And so they're always on edge and very difficult to deal with quite often for that reason. And a lot of them, you feel, money seems to be their sort of god. I mean, they'll collect the trophy house and the trophy car and the trophy yacht and the trophy wife. I mean, everything is a trophy just to show how well they've done. And a lot of them, the really good ones, they make more money than they can possibly spend in several lifetimes. So I've asked them, well, why do you keep on? What keeps you going? And they said, oh, now money is just a scoreboard. I just want to show people how well I'm doing and measure myself against my rivals. Now, okay, but I think that's rather sad if that's all they're going to end up doing. But to them, you see, money is more than a hobby, it's their entire life.
Yeah.
And I think that can very easily happen to the rest of us in a small way. At odd times, you get completely consumed by the idea of money or the feeling you've got to make some, or you're going to get into debt and you're afraid money will drag you down. And so it begins to get on top of you. And I think that's the sort of thing you've got to guard against, because I think you've always got to keep money in some sort of perspective. I think a big factor is our childhood experiences. I mean, say your parents had to pull you out of private school because maybe your dad lost his job, or you had to move house because you couldn't afford the mortgage anymore, or maybe you went off to a friend's house and you found he lived in somewhere far more expensive, far more luxurious than you could ever have imagined. That sort of experience, when you're quite young, can set you for life, for good or ill, if you really, get too obsessed with it. The trick is not to do that. Now, we all know we can have too little money, but I want to try and persuade you you can also have too much. I mean, take a lottery win, which is the best chance most of us have of making big money. Last week, those two guys, 250 million each. Now, they're probably having a whale of a time right now. They're spending money like water, they're going to all the best clubs and restaurants, they're going up Rodeo Drive and buying whatever they want from the expensive shops. I'm sure before long they'll take themselves off on a first-class trip to Europe or Asia or South America. But eventually they've got to come home and think about the long term. I'm sure they'll come home to a much better home than the one they left. But they've got to sit down and think about what they're going to do. And they're going to be surrounded by advisors trying to make a buck out of them. If they're going to think, even if they can't spend all the money they've got, they've got to think about maybe their children and what's going to happen to the future. So I'm sure they're going to be persuaded to try and protect their wealth, maybe by investing on the stock market, which they might have no experience of at all. Now you might think, well, with that money I can just give it to a fund manager and forget about it. The trouble is, if you think about it, you've got to choose that fund manager.
Yes.
In the end, you've got to sign the contract that says, I will appoint this guy. Or maybe you might, to spread, diversify your risk, you might get 3 or 4 fund managers. Yeah. You've got to pick them. So all of a sudden, you've become the chief fund manager. And protecting your money is becoming, if not a full-time job, a fairly busy job you never expected you had. Then there's the personal side of winning the lottery. It's like the story of the guy who comes home and says, honey, I've won the lottery, pack your bags. And she says, oh, shall I pack for the mountain or the seaside? And he says, I don't care, just pack your bags and get the hell out of here. That can happen in real life quite a lot. I mean, you suddenly find you've got long lost cousins you never knew you had, all knocking on your door and trying to take a few bucks out of you. I knew a guy in Ireland, a guy called Jerry Robinson, who made about 30 million. And he was the youngest of 10 children, Catholic family. And his brothers and sisters had all had kids, therefore his nephews and nieces, who were as old as him, if not older. So when they knew he was in the money, they came knocking. Yeah. Either for because they were down on their luck, or maybe they had some whiz-bang project they wanted him to finance. And he was in danger of wrecking the family. In the end, he had to draw up a set of rules so that everyone knew where they stood. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure most lottery winners, big and small, perfectly happy. I do the lottery myself. What I'm saying is, there's more to it than meets the eye. And you've got to keep that in perspective. But what I want to do is to go back to basics and ask the question, do we need money? I mean, if you think about it, our forefathers managed without money for thousands of years. And you think again, we're the only animal on the planet that uses money. Yeah. I mean, elephants and lions and cats and dogs, they don't need money. Yeah. They're not worried about their pension or their mortgage. No. They get on perfectly well. And in a lot of areas, even today, we manage without money. I mean, the docents at the Huntington Gardens, they're not paid. Even something as big as the London Olympics this summer was largely run by volunteers. And you can go next door to the library, pick a book off the shelf, check it out, read it. As long as you bring it back on time, it hasn't cost you a red cent. So money doesn't get into every aspect of our lives. Does it need to be here at all? Well, I think if we didn't have money, life would fall apart, because we need something to get us up in the morning. And we need something to also restrain our demand for things. But if you go back to the old days, before money was invented, life was pretty basic. People were born with nothing, and they died with nothing. They probably never moved more than a couple of miles from where they were born. The basic unit was the family. Remember those? You'd have maybe a patch of land, you'd grow some vegetables, you'd maybe raise some chickens or rabbits, you'd have some basic sort of shack to live in, and that was it. No leisure time, because this, just keeping yourself alive kept you busy all day in and day out. Now, the beginnings of money happened when people started cooperating with their neighbour, almost the old equivalent of the borrowing the cup of sugar. You'd help one another out, and gradually people found that in a village certain people were good at certain things. Someone might be the best at making shoes or growing potatoes or whatever, and so people would come to them and say, can I have some potatoes and I'll give you some of this in return. And that was how barter started. But people weren't bartering for very long before they started bargaining. They realised that they'd be better off the less they gave and the more they got. So all of a sudden you're starting to measure things and weigh them. It's not just a sack of potatoes, it's 3 pound of potatoes. It's not just a bunch of eggs, it's a dozen eggs, and so on. And that was how the whole idea of exchange got going, and in a way that actually started economic progress in a small way. But as you can realise, it's a very cumbersome system, because as economists put it, for barter to work you need a coincidence of needs. You've got to want what I've got, and vice versa. And that slows things down tremendously. So they started using the beginnings of money. It was what was called commodity money in the old days. So anything that was portable and durable that everyone wanted, you could then take and hand on to someone else. And all sorts of things were used as money. And cattle, which is a bit lumpy, rather large thing to use. But tobacco, salt, seashells, stones, even candy were used as money. And this was important because it was fine if all you're doing is just dealing with the small stuff. But supposing you lived in an area where there were buffalo roaming. Now, one person can't catch and kill a buffalo. You need a bunch of you. So supposing a bunch of you do that, and you get the buffalo and you kill it and you cut it up and someone gets the hide and all the rest of it, how do you share all that out? Do you share it out equally? Or does the guy who kill it gets more than the rest? And so on. You could, you're into the beginning of deciding who gets what, which is really what money is designed to sort out. Now, after a while, they realised that using all these various substitutes for money were themselves a bit cumbersome. So around about 700 BC, in what's now modern Turkey, they thought of the idea of using lumps of metal for the initial money, which they stamped with a lion's head to show it was real. It was like a mixture of gold and silver. That stamping was called coining, which is why the metal we have in our pockets are called coins. And that was really the beginning of it, because once you had that in a convenient form, people could save money. They could use it to invest in things. They could follow up ideas. And the whole of our present economy got going to where we are today. I mean, you think how much we owe money now. This building couldn't exist. There'd be no TV, no automobiles, no radios, no mobile phones. Also, more importantly, no hospitals, which was why in the old days many children died in childbirth, and the average life expectancy was about 20 or 30. So yeah, look around this room. We'd all be dead, but for money. We owe money a huge, huge debt, which I think we often take for granted in our sort of rush to our obsession with trying to handle it and trying to make the most of it. but it also shows how powerful money can be. And what it does for us now is it acts as a stick and a carrot. It gets us up in the morning to do a job, otherwise why would you? It's also as a way of paying people to do jobs we don't want to do, like cleaning the streets, mending the roads, things like that. And it acts as an incentive for people to take risks and maybe go for the really tough competitive jobs, like professional sportsmen, entertainers. I mean, I know they want the glory, but making $1 million a year also helps. So money drives them as well. But from that, money makes us behave in strange ways. I mean, look at the current credit crunch. At the moment, we've got millions of people out of work, and we've got millions more who can't move house because of negative equity, who would like to move house in many cases to get a job or get a better job. So the whole economy is just held down, all because of rows of numbers in bank accounts and the fact that banks are unwilling to lend. So money is affecting our behaviour in a real way. To try and break the deadlock, and some economists have suggested, half seriously, of stuffing helicopters with dollar bills, sending them up and just throwing the money out in the air for people to pick up. And the idea is it would be money you never otherwise had, so you'd be more willing to spend it and get the economy going. And in fact, Obama tried something like that in 2009, if you remember. We had these $700 billion of tax rebates. But it didn't work because by then the credit crunch was 2 years in, and a lot of people were more concerned to pay down debt than they were to go spending. But what we're doing here is it shows how the effect of combining money with time. I mean, if all you're doing with money is taking it to the store to buy a can of beans, that's simple. But as soon as you start combining money with time, you bring into play all our different personalities, because you're then looking at our views of the future, whether we're pessimists or optimists at any one time. I think this generation, certainly the kids, they're going to be affected by the economic crunch in the way that they were in the 30s. And I think we're going to have a generation of fairly cautious people who are going to be quite alarmed by their children, who are going to be a lot more optimistic, and that's the way it goes. But you see what's happening. If you have extra money you want to save or invest, or indeed if you haven't got enough money and you want to accelerate your spending and therefore you're deciding whether to borrow, it all depends on your ability to take risk and your ability to repay, or indeed your confidence that your money is going to be safe. And these are all judgment calls that we all have to make. But they're much more influenced by our personalities than we often realise. I mean, sometimes borrowing, for example, can be very straightforward. If you want to borrow to get a house, you can afford the repayments. Or if you're a student, a student loan makes perfect sense because you hope you're going to graduate and get a better job than you otherwise would. Trouble is, at the moment, there's a lot of students graduating, and all they're doing is flipping hamburgers in McDonald's, but they've still got to pay their student loan off. So our forecasts of the future aren't always correct, and we can get into sort of habits. Well, I wouldn't say bad habits, but habits that will actually affect our financial position without realising it. I mean, maybe there's a gym membership or a magazine subscription leaking out of your bank account month by month, and you've forgotten all about it. Or, to take a trivial case, maybe you've got into the habit of going to Starbucks every morning and buying yourself a large decaf latte. That can cost. One of the best tips I got was to buy the brewed coffee. Saves me $1 or $2 every time. But that only works because I actually like the brewed coffee. It's not worth doing just for the sake of it. And I had a friend in England who bought the cheapest type of beer. He hated the taste. He really did, and it was awful. But he was saying, well, I'm saving so much every pint I buy. But that's the sort of bind we can get into very easily. You know, you're getting things completely the wrong way round. And an extreme example of how the future, or our view of the future, can affect the way we handle money is gambling. I mean, gambling's a bit like alcohol. Some people won't touch it. Some people are so addicted they have to go to Gamblers Anonymous, and happily most of us are somewhere in the middle. But it's very much influenced by our temperaments, and the big gamblers have definitely, well, they've got something wrong with them in many cases. I mean, I knew a family where the father was a big gambler, and they literally didn't know from one week to the next whether they have any money to buy food to eat. And they were completely on edge all the time. And the mother and the daughters, they would fly off the handle at the slightest excuse, all because their father was a compulsive gambler. Now, quite what his motive was, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe he was trying to teach them a lesson, show how dependent they all were on him. The one theory is that a lot of gamblers have some sort of chemical imbalance. They need to gamble at a high and risky level just to give them that adrenaline. Maybe other gamblers are just lousy at calculating odds, which is why I think so many people spend far more than they should on the lottery, because they just can't conceive of the astronomical odds against ever winning. So gambling is one of those things that it just shows how your personality can affect your behaviour. One of the decisions I made very early on about gambling saved me, over the years, thousands and thousands of dollars. I decided I wasn't going to play poker anymore. Right. I mean, I never played it that much, and I never lost much. But the version we used to play, you had to put your money down before you saw your cards. I didn't like that. Whoa, I know. This was before Texas Hold'em. Yeah. But also, I wasn't very good at calculating the odds of whether any particular hand would win. And, well, I haven't got a poker face. I can't bluff to save my life. Now, it may be that if I worked at it, I could have got good at poker and made money out of it. Maybe become world champion. But it would have been hard work, and I wouldn't have enjoyed it. So I'm quite glad, on balance, that the decision I made. On the other hand, if I go to a racetrack, I'll happily bet on the horses. No more than maybe $10 a race, just to make life interesting. And as I said before, I do play the lottery. A lot of people dismiss the lottery as a tax on stupidity, and I won't disagree with that. But I only bet $4 a week, and it's the only chance I reckon I've got of making that 100 million that would bring all those problems I was talking about earlier on. Like us all, I'll deal with those problems when I come up against them. But there's my gambling strategy. No poker, occasional bets on the horses, and a weekly lottery bet. There's nothing logical about that, and I think it roughly reflects my personality. I'm fairly cautious, but don't mind taking the odd risk. And that brings me to golden rule number 1. If you want to handle money successfully, you have to know yourself. A lot of the problems people have is from not knowing themselves properly, or thinking they're something they're not. I don't mean grander or better in any way, but just getting their own analysis of themselves wrong. And what I suggest, if you feel you need to sort things out, is you need to sit down with a friend who's honest enough and you respect their views enough to tell you exactly where you may be going wrong. So not perhaps your husband or wife. But the big secret to saving money is to discover these unconscious attitudes we have that take us off the main freeway and are continually diverting us onto little side roads where we end up going nowhere and coming back and looking where the map is again. Because one of the big secrets to making money is to stop making mistakes. It's not about coming up with some marvelous investment idea. It's the fewer mistakes you make, the fewer the losses you make. And not making losses is the answer to a lot of people's financial problems. Which brings me to rule 2, which is simply get out of debt. One of the big problems we've had with the credit crunch is people were borrowing far too much. The banks were letting them have far too much money for these subprime mortgages. So they're now over their heads in repaying those. But also credit card debt got completely out of control. And I'm not against people borrowing to buy a house or if they've got a solid business idea. But it went well beyond that. And if you think about it, there are a lot of people with thousands of dollars in the bank who also owe thousands of dollars, which is crazy because the bank always pays you a lot less than they charge. That's how they make their money. And I went to the bank last week just to pay in a small check. The guy gets my account up on his screen and he can see I've got money in there, and he still says to me, "Would you like a line of credit?" So I said, "Let me get this straight. You're going to lend me back my money at a rate of interest. Why am I going to do that?" And he sort of smiled, made an excuse, and I got the hell out. But you know, people will continually try and do it, but life is a lot simpler, maybe in some ways a little bit more boring, I grant you. It's a lot simpler without debt, and you find you can much more easily see where you're standing. Rule 3 is to, as far as money goes, think for yourself. Or to put it another way, if something looks too good to be true, it probably is. And it's so easy to follow the herd when it comes to money. People do it all the time on the stock market, which is why it goes up and down so erratically. But I mean, the best case of people not thinking for themselves was, of course, our old friend Bernie Madoff. The interesting thing about Bernie was that most of his clients were millionaires. They were sophisticated people. They had advisors. But they still fell for the oldest trick in the book. I can get you a better deal than anyone else. I can beat the market. I mean, I was asked to do an interview for a magazine with a guy in California, a fund manager, whose fund had been going up for 18 years straight. It was mainly in commodities, gold and so on. And I said, yeah, I'll happily do it. But if he's doing that well, either he's got a system, and I want to know the system,